I heard it's a question that you were asked a lot during TIFF, and I'm curious, not just the question, but why the question comes up, which is why Devil's Not now? Like why at this point something that's dealing with that event when it occurred chronologically, and also when the documentaries came out.
Sure.
So that question, but also the sub-question of periodization.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'd seen the original documentary in 1996, like most people, Paradise Lost. I wasn't, keeping up with, I wasn't obsessed with the case. I mean, I was very interested in that documentary at the time, just because it seemed remarkable to see the court system and to see that document. I mean, going back to that period, the HBO crew, Joe and Bruce, were not there to make a documentary about this mistrial. They were there to make a documentary about Satanism and youth and the South, and suddenly having these cameras in the room, realized that they were getting something quite remarkable, and it's a rare documentary from that point of view. Also, it reveals something which most people don't talk about, which is when characters, especially people who are raised in the Southern Gothic tradition, are being filmed, there's a performative aspect. So what you see with the John Mark Byers in that documentary is a person who is clearly performing for a documentary camera. And I think one of the things that I felt when I waded into this material and rewatched the documentaries and looked into a lot of the other media around it was that a lot of the people were performing for either the documentary cameras or the news cameras, and that there was a way that with a feature film where you're working with professional actors, you could create tonally something which was more reflective of reality. And also, in this case, the reality of what was actually happening, which was that in a courtroom, the whole trial is based on circumstantial evidence. Now, in reality, you're not supposed to use circumstantial evidence unless all other avenues have been completely exhausted. And what happened in this case was that there are many avenues that were not pursued. And I felt that in a dramatic film, you could explore that. You could look at the different avenues that were not pursued by reconstructing them. And documentary cameras were not there. So documentary cameras did not show Chris Morgan, did not show Bojangles, did not, the Bloody Man at the Bojangles, did not show a number of things which we could reconstruct and make part of the this feature project, this dramatized fiction. So I never had an issue with wading back into that subject matter because I think there are things you can do with dramatic fiction that you simply can't do with documentary, and most specifically, it's possible to have a more ambiguous agenda. I think documentaries by their form need to have for the most part, I mean there are exceptions of course, but you need to have a fixed point of view. And that there was an ambiguity that was afforded, and which I felt in this particular case was welcome. And I do treat it as a piece of mythology. I think what happened in West Memphis 20 years ago is mythological in stature because there could not be a more heightened crime scene. I mean, imagine 4 8-year-old boys are found naked, bound by their own shoelaces, mutilated, and submerged in a swamp with absolutely no physical evidence. There's no footprints, there's no DNA, there's no blood evidence, no branches have been disturbed. It's supernatural. So if you were to create a crime scene in a fiction, no one would believe it. It wouldn't make sense. But this happened 20 years ago, and this community had to deal with this, and especially being a Southern community, a community that's completely obsessed with religion, and that is what the South is about, more than race perhaps. And in our time, it's about the fact that it is a Bible Belt. So Satan is something that's present in people's minds. There's a sense of evil. So this is clearly a demonic act, having 3 8-year-old boys found submerged and mutilated. So a demon had to have done this. And if that demon is not immediately apparent, then it needs to be created. And that's what happened. You know, they had a youth with a history of mental illness, and someone who certainly wasn't very good at playing his innocence in Damien Eccles,
Yep.
and they were able to construct this and really, based entirely on circumstantial evidence, make a jury believe that so that is the act of magic in the movie. For all the talk of, you know, conjuring things and rituals, the only real act of magic happens when the prosecutor at the end, Fogelman, that's a direct quotation, that's exactly what he said that we see in the film, that he was able to through some alchemical process say, you know, there is no hard evidence, but put all of this circumstantial evidence on this table together, mix it all up, and there you have it. You know, there you have a demon without a soul. And people believed it. And that to me is remarkable. Like, that to me is the stuff of drama. So, I mean, what I feel resentful a little bit is that when you bring a film like that to a festival, and yes, all the journalists have seen the documentaries, and yes, it's true that in the past 2 years, you know, there's been 2 other documentaries, both of them premiering here. There was the Berlinger-Samofsky last one, and then there was like West of Memphis the year before. So people are exhausted. And we didn't understand or anticipate that. But I do get really tired of the fact that everyone goes, well, do we need to see another documentary or another film that deals with this? Because most audiences outside of a festival have never heard of this case. And you know, the most successful screenings we've had have been public screenings. And even if you went to the festival screening here, you know, like, you could feel in an audience that people are really held by the story. But I also understand the exhaustion, you know, from the professional journalists. And I think probably, you know, there was an article in Entertainment Weekly which probably said it best, Owen Gleiberman, saying, you know, do we need another film about the West Memphis 3 even if it's good? And I guess that's the general point of view. And a lot of people are erring towards the fact that, well, you know, we've seen the documentaries, but I think it's a little lazy. I think that the documentaries actually don't explore what this film does. And certainly, you know, doesn't, you know, I mean, we are focusing on a character that is not in the documentaries, and that, you know, someone that, you know, was very important to the case, and looking at these 2 characters played by Colin Firth and Reese Witherspoon, that, you know, one is the mother of one of the boys who's killed, and the other is a private investigator who's working pro bono for the defense team. And, you know, both of them are increasingly skeptical of what they're seeing. One from an emotional, intuitive point of view, the mother, and the other one from a, you know, a more rational, analytical point of view. And they both sort of come, you know, to a meeting in a forest at the end where they acknowledge that. And the film, you know, what excited me also was that it has no third act. You know, for a film that's sort of set up, you know, with this horrible crime, and you feel, you know, you as a viewer who don't know anything about it are suddenly thrown into this place, and you feel the mounting horror of it, and the confusion and the tension. And suddenly you're in a courtroom, you have Colin, you know, in a suit, you know, looking like he's the guy who's going to save the day, but he doesn't. Like, no one does. And we're left in, you know, the third act in this place that's very unresolved. That also interested me dramatically, because it's not conventional, and it's not a place where you could go if you were writing the script. It would be too perverse to kind of suddenly set this all up and not have an answer. But in fact, there is no answer. And I honestly don't believe there will be an answer. So I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I just think that, you know, that's the nature of it, and that's why it'll maintain its mythological status, because we'll never know what really happened in that swamp 20 years ago.